สวัสดีค่ะ Good evening everyone. Welcome you to the dinner talk co-hosted by Friedrich Naumann Foundation and Thai BISPA. We are so honored to have you here. So just to give you a brief idea of this dinner talk, we are trying to gather our startup communities in Thailand, not only from the private sector, but also those who are in the ecosystem. So that's why we title this dinner talk as the Building an Ecosystem for Startups. So this is our pleasure to have this kind of event to be like a kickoff event for the next year as we together, the Friedrich Naumann and Thai BISPA will work on the project to support startups not only in Thailand but in the region to help them grow in the global arena. So just to give you a brief agenda of today's session, we will have the representatives from both sides to do the welcome remarks, and then we will have a chance to listen to our honorary speakers, Mr. Siegfried Herzog, the Regional Director for Southeast Asia and East Asia from Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and also another guest speaker who flew far away from us to be here with us today, Ms. Samantha Kapunen, Managing Director from iOneSeats, an online bus booking platform in the Philippines. So, and then we will proceed to the dinner area just behind us to enjoy networking dinner. So just to enjoy the session from today, may I invite Catherine Bernard from Friedrich Naumann to give welcome remarks from the foundation side, please.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation here in Thailand. For those of you who do not know the foundation yet, we are 60 years old. We're turning 60 next year, and we've been in Thailand for 40 years already. We are a German foundation, and we promote good governance and democracy, and we believe that this is being done through mainly three components, which is civic participation, rule of law, and market economy. And in the past, we have worked intensively on the first two ones I mentioned, and we would like to enhance our programs in the market economy area, specifically focusing on startups, because we believe that startups play a very important role in changing societies, and they play an important role to offer opportunities to people to participate economically in a society. Normally host a lot of trainings and as well sometimes platforms for discussions like this, policy dialogue on the policy environment. And as you have already mentioned, this is the very first one where we focus on startups. This is the initial event, and we hope to engage with you more in the coming years. I'm very glad to have two good friends of mine, or of the foundation, speaking tonight here. One is my dear colleague and actually boss, Siegfried Herzog, an economist by training. So we think he's in the best position to look at the German experience. What can we learn from Germany and also in Germany? What is there to learn for Germans? And Samantha is a good friend of the foundation in the Philippines, and I'm also very, very glad that you took the time and came over to speak to us tonight. We believe that everyone is an expert, so we don't expect that we will give long lectures and that's it, but we hope that there will be an interesting discussion, that we will learn from each other. And with these words, I would like to hand over to our partner, Thai BISPA, and look very much forward to the evening today.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your nice welcome. And on Thai BISPA side, we also have our board member presenting here, two of them actually. May I invite Mr. Chalermpon Tujinda, he's the secretary of Thai BISPA, to become on stage and to give a welcome from Thai BISPA side. He is also a software park director under National Science and Technology Development Agency. May I?
Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. I think it's a very good event today where we two organizations collaborate hosting this event. Okay, I think at this time it's a very exciting time for Thailand because the startup has been booming for the past 2 years, where we had started having the National Startup Committees 2 years ago. We have Startup Thailand event. The last 2 years, we have like 36,000 people came the first year and 40-some thousand people came. Hopefully this year will be more. Okay, so it's very exciting. And a lot of ecosystem around Thailand start to be forming up very convincingly, I would say. And Thai BISPA has been established, might not be as quite long as the Friedrich Naumann, but we have been established for the last 9 years. And the form of this association has been formed by 3 ministers: Ministry of Education, Minister of Science, Technology, and Minister of Industry, forming up together and having the free hand to be run as a private. So we have been running and gathering members, about 43 organization members. And among that, probably about 36 incubation center in the upper tier, so mostly in the technology incubation. So the activities of Thai BISPA mostly around create awareness, provide training, provide workshop, focusing on how we can help the incubation center management of people to be ready or to be more effective in their work, not only for incubation but also science park. So Thai BISPA stands for Thai and Business Incubation and Science Park. Okay, that's the BISPA. So from that point on, that's we doing the human resource development. Currently, we are working on projects where we designing the capability maturity model for incubator, so that the government can help developing each incubator in a more structured way, so they can know what level they're in and what kind of service or what kind of knowledge they should have. And I think we see ourselves as a connecting all the dots, so creating all the getting people together, both local and international. So we also have activities going different countries, getting people to know each other. So I think we're part of the in eco assistance in making sure that everything are working together and well. Okay, thank you very much, and hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chalermpon, for your talk. And it comes to the waiting session that you all are expecting to listen for. May I invite Mr. Siegfried Herzog, Regional Director for Southeast and East Asia, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, to give a brief introduction of German in general and maybe some projects you would like to introduce. Please.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you. Can I have my presentation, please? Oh, I have the printout. All right. I've been asked to talk this evening about the experience of Germany and about the ecosystem for startups in Germany. So I'm not a startup entrepreneur myself, but as has been mentioned, I'm an economist by training, and we as a as the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, we are also very much concerned about civic education and policy reform in Germany, and digitalization is one of the big issues that we tackle as well. So I'm going to look more at the framework conditions, at the ecosystem for startups, where Samantha will later talk more from the point of view of an entrepreneur. So what are startups? Germans like to start with definitions, so here's mine that I took from the literature. Basically, startups are digitally driven companies that are no more than 10 years old. They are highly innovative, and they have a big growth potential, scalability, in other words. Obviously, companies have been founded since time immemorial. So when we talk today of startups, what is really new is that with the growth of information technology and the growth of the internet, suddenly markets have become very scalable. In the past, companies usually grew first in their home market, and then maybe after several years they would start venturing into foreign markets. But that came much later and at a slower pace. Nowadays, internet-based companies can move out of their home market and into the global market relatively fast, sometimes simultaneously. And that has really changed the rules of the game. It also means that the potential for growth and for income, for profits, is completely different than in the past. So nowadays the big internet companies like Amazon and Google are bigger than, in terms of market capitalization, are bigger than all the established industries. What is the challenge for startups in Germany? As you know, the German economy is doing pretty well. It's seen as the powerhouse of Europe. But when we look at the reality of our companies, at the companies that drive the German economy, we see that most of them are actually dating from before World War II, and some date from before World War I. So in other words, we're relying on business models that are 100 years old, or at least 70 years old. And we have missed out on the first wave of IT innovation. The big IT companies that we all know are practically all American. So our economic success, to some extent, has hidden these weaknesses from view. That the traditional industries are still going strong, but the industries of the future, of the next wave, they are not yet well developed in Germany. And that is a real threat to our long-term prosperity. And this is a challenge. It's a challenge both for businesses, for corporations that need to think, where will future growth come from? It's also a challenge for government, for political parties, for social actors, because many of our rules and regulations, our laws, are designed around big companies or regular traditional companies in mind. And they are not very well suited to the startup culture, which is very different, which requires far more flexibility, far more speed, and far more light-footedness. And in Germany, there is also a cultural issue that we have a general risk aversion. This is partly due to our tormented history. So people value security and stability very much, but it is a problem for the startup culture because, and this is not just in the case of startups, all companies, all new companies have a very high attrition rate. Most companies, I mean in the case of new companies, 50 to 60% don't survive the first year. That's true for Germany as well as for Thailand, as well as for Botswana, Peru or the US. So when you encourage startups, when you encourage new enterprises, you have to factor in that half of them or more than half of them will fail. That's normal. But this is something that we find very hard to accept emotionally. Let me move on to what are success factors of startups. What makes for a good startup ecosystem? One is cluster effects. When you look at startups, very often they cluster together because they share a joint culture. Sometimes they cluster together in the same building. together with startups, we also have this new model of basically sharing office space with co-working spaces, where companies can easily move in and out. Clusters, really effective clusters, are the ones that also include links to universities, who have to be open for that, who have to be geared towards supporting entrepreneurship, and linkages to established businesses. So that, because startups very often provide services and provide innovative ideas for established businesses, so they're not necessarily competitors, very often they are complementary to each other. So a successful cluster has all three: links between startups, universities and existing companies. Then of course, access to cheap office space, infrastructure, ease of doing business is very important. That it's easy to start a company, that the bureaucratic hurdles and the bureaucratic requirements are kept to a minimum in the critical phase, in the critical first year of operations. And that you have access to qualified staff. In my definition of startups, which is very much oriented towards innovative IT companies, you need staff who can speak English, you need staff who are tech savvy, who have a background in mathematics, in coding. So all that challenges existing education systems that may not be good at producing people with those skills and attitudes. And you also, of course, need financing. You need venture capital financing, investors who are willing to take the risk in order to reap the big rewards that startups can provide. Next. So let me give you some examples of successful clusters in Germany. One is, of course, Berlin, otherwise our most misgoverned city, but it is the startup capital of Germany. And why is that so? One is Berlin, at least until very recently, used to be dirt cheap. Average rents in Berlin were lower than the national average. Normally in a capital city, rents are much higher than in the rest of the country. So Paris rents or London rents or New York rents are way above the national average. In Berlin they were lower, and even today they're probably more or less at the national average. So compared to other big cities, Berlin is still very cheap and has an abundance of old factories that can be converted into the sort of co-working spaces or startup spaces that startups need. There is also quite a few research institutes in Berlin, and hence you get qualified staff, and you have that cluster effect between a vibrant startup culture and universities. Another cluster is Munich. Munich, of course, is our most expensive city, but there we have one of the best universities in Germany, LMU, Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, which for quite a few years has invested in helping groom entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of linkages to established bigger companies with an angel investor in the form of one of Germany's richest women, Susanne Klatten, who's one of the co-owners of BMW. So she has heavily invested in creating a startup environment where the new startups are linked to BMW and to other established firms in Munich. So that is a very unique approach. And the third one is Karlsruhe. Some talk about Karlsruhe, Stuttgart, which is in the extreme southwest of Germany. There, again, we have a city with relatively lower rents. There's a supportive university that has, unlike many other German universities, has really focused on grooming entrepreneurs, on building linkages with entrepreneurship. And there you have a very innovative small and medium enterprise scene. The southwest of Germany is home to many small or especially medium-sized enterprises that are world market leaders in their field that you and I have never heard of, but that dominate their field on the global market. So that again, those again are potential customers or real customers for such a startup scene. Okay. Where do we have our deficits in Germany? Why is Germany lagging behind the US and China in creating innovative startups? One is that our education system does not provide the kids with both the necessary skills and the entrepreneurial attitude. There's very little entrepreneurship training in German schools, and when you look at the way German schools teach, they are still very much in the chalkboard age. And this is a serious problem. Our school bureaucracy and our education bureaucracy is rather resistant to change, and our teachers union and the teachers they represent are also not all that keen to change. They have job security, they are well paid, they don't want to be bothered by having to change their old ways. There's an attitude problem among quite a few of companies that don't quite see the value of a startup culture yet, or the value of cooperating with them, that are too complacent in their existing business models. Government does not pay enough attention to startup needs because this is a new sector, and even though it's becoming important and it's creating more and more jobs, the existing interest groups in society, the existing political interest groups basically crowd them out, and they want to preserve the status quo and their privileges, and politics so far has followed that a bit too much. And another point is also a negative attitude towards skilled foreigners, both foreign workers and potential startup founders. They find it hard to come to Germany and obtain a work visa or start a business if they're not from EU countries, and that again is a crucial limitation. Otherwise we could forge easier linkages to American or Chinese entrepreneurial talent. So here our immigration laws are a problem, and this is a problem in many countries where it is not yet fully realized that when we talk about startups and the startup culture, this is no longer a national project. This is nowadays an international issue, and these companies are not playing in the national pond, they're playing relatively quickly in the international market, in the global market. And so to approach this with blinkered anti-foreigner rules and blinkered worries about immigration is doing the country a great disservice. And we do need to be far more open to foreign talent, foreign capital, and foreigners who want to try their luck in the German market. So what are the demands of German startups regarding a better ecosystem? And I've gotten much of this from the Association of German Startups, so this is in order of importance. The first one is really redesign the bureaucratic rules and the laws to make life easier for new businesses, especially labor laws and social security laws that are really cumbersome and that are geared towards big corporations with bureaucratic departments who can create rules and procedures that conform to these laws, but that is something completely unsuitable for startups. So for startups, we really need to have a far lighter regulatory structure. We don't have enough venture capital in Germany, and there are several reasons of tax disincentives, of rules that hamper venture capital funds. When you compare Germany and the US, the US economy is 5 times bigger than the German economy, but it has 13 times the venture capital. So you can easily see that German startups operate at a disadvantage because it is very hard for them to access finance, especially for the crucial second phase when they are starting to establish themselves, when their business model has been proven, but to really expand they need then serious money in the 10 million plus euro range. And for that, our capital market for startups is just too small. And government regulation has something to do with it, and tax regulation. So we do need to encourage more investment in this sector, and government has a big role to play there. Startups also complain about the lack of entrepreneurship education in schools, so this is something that they have been pushing, that the education system really needs to change and really needs to get its act together. And that we should also foster more cooperation, also investment cooperation between existing firms and startups. I mentioned this before, that there's an attitude problem in many existing traditional companies. And indeed that we should have a better immigration law that makes it much easier for foreign founders, for foreign skilled workers to come to Germany. There's a great potential there. I mentioned China and the US, but a country closer to us is Israel, which has one of the most vibrant startup cultures, and a lot of young Israelis actually want to come to Berlin, but again, they find it often cumbersome to start a business or work there. And this again is a serious disadvantage. We also need to modernize our data protection law and ensure net neutrality. So here again, keeping the internet open, not regulating it too much, not trying to impose too many laws is crucial, because this sector is of vital importance for our future. I had mentioned that Berlin is the startup capital of Germany. In Berlin, that sector employs nowadays about 77,000 people and contributes about 8% to the city's economy. It's bigger than the construction sector. And Berlin, as I mentioned, is a rather misgoverned city and doesn't have much going in the way of economic power. It's the only capital in a big country that actually subtracts from GDP, because so many people are on welfare. So Berlin subtracts about 0.2% of the German GDP rather than adding to it. And startups is the one sector with a big growth potential and already an established contribution to the economy. So this is big, this is important. And we as a country need to make a decision. Do we want to regulate everything to death, or do we bite the bullet and allow more freedom, especially for the internet, in taking into account that there will be some messy outcomes here and there, but overall it is needed to really generate more employment and really move the economy into the 21st century. And lastly, broadband access, our internet infrastructure is shamefully deficient, and this needs to change. So finally, is something happening? In the last few years, things have slowly started to change. The German Startup Association has been formed in 2012 to lobby government and to lobby the public more about the needs for this dynamic new sector. And they are making an impact in people's realization that this is really something we need to take more seriously and to make space for. The lack of funding, the government has responded to some extent by creating a venture capital arm for our big development bank, the KfW. This is a government-owned development bank that operates both in Germany and abroad. So they are becoming now more engaged in venture capital funding. The broadband connectivity will be improved now. Finally, Germany took a decision that henceforth we will invest mainly in optical fiber and no longer in copper wires, which is long overdue. And during the last election, one of our important parties, the Liberal Party, the Free Democrats, they highlighted this whole issue, that the country needs to change, that we need to become more open to digital innovation, that we need to take startups more seriously, and that the country needs to revamp its education, its infrastructure, and its tax policies, its economic regulations, in order to not miss the boat and work on creating the economy of the future. I included a picture of an election poster. It says digital first, bedenken, that means worries second. Digital first, worries second. So let's take a clear decision. This is something we need. Let's go for it. And let the worries take care of them afterwards. One can correct here and there later, but let's not kill the potential before it's even started to unfold. And this is one of the reasons why the party did fairly well in the elections, and about 40% of all startup funders, of the startup community voted for it. So it's become now part of the political conversation in Germany, finally, belatedly, and this is at least giving us hope that the future of the startup ecosystem in Germany will be a bit brighter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Siegfried, for your talk, and I think this is the good input for our discussion at the end of the session. So, in the meantime, I would like to invite another speaker to be on stage with us. So, Ms. Samantha will give us an idea about her business and also share some experience from the Philippines case study. So, may I invite Samantha to be here with us? A big applause, please. Thank you.
Stand here. Okay, so while I'm waiting for my, oh, there. All right. So I was asked also to talk a bit about the startup ecosystem, so I may cover something on the ecosystem as well as Mr. Herzog covered, but from a perspective of an entrepreneur. So, next. So just a bit of a background, maybe you're wondering who's this girl in front of you talking. I'm Samantha, I'm co-founder and managing director of I Want Seats, which is an online bus booking platform in the Philippines. So I post 3 pictures here representing what I usually do. Usually I'm a bus girl. My friends call me a bus girl because I'm always either in the terminals or in a bus. I like to travel, but this is actually me doing ground research. Since I work in the bus industry, bus transport, it helps me look for opportunities other than what I'm already giving. First, second is I also do some talks and also do some mentorship for university students in tech who want to be tech entrepreneurs. So I'm trying to pass on, you know, the small knowledge that I've gained through the years to the students in hopes that they will eventually turn out to be like me or better. Because I have this, I worry about the future of jobs, for example, because of automation, which I see because I work in tech. So I see a danger in displacement. The way universities train students for jobs, I try to contribute to change the conversation in such a way that it's not just about jobs, but also about entrepreneurship when they graduate. And then mostly I'm just also a geek, so here's me with trains in Japan. Next. I'm gonna go through briefly on what the top's about. Sir Siegfried mentioned earlier, give a brief definition of it. I'll just add some more. In terms of the stages of a startup, I want to go through this before we go to the ecosystem because depending on, there are elements in the ecosystem that service validated to your market. You launch it, you let your users give feedback and then continuously improve the product and the service. And as you continue to improve it, you are then able to scale, meaning to expand your startup in different markets or to expand in different, more services or products. For example, Grab from Malaysia started as Grab Taxi, just a ride-hailing app. And then they started to expand their market to Singapore, to the Philippines. And they also expanded their services. Now you can book Grab with book Grab car, and also in the Philippines you can send parcels as also packages. So it's not just a person, you can also send packages with Grab. And then as you scale, you become more successful, you eventually reach a point of being established in the industry. You become an industry leader. For example, Uber has reached this point. They're the leading startup for ride-hailing, for example. And at this point, you're able to exit, for example, or do an acquisition. Next. Okay, this has been mentioned earlier, but it's just in like a nice graph. So you have the I'll go through this from my experience. You have the universities, basically not just universities, but learning institutions in general. This is where your talent comes from, mostly. And in my experience, I go through my hiring process looking at how universities have trained the people that I would hire. If they're excelling, they're a university that, for example, excels in, bringing out talented developers. And you have the research organizations. These are maybe market research and technology research. In my case, there's a research organization in transportation that I always follow because they have leading news on transport technology. You have support organizations like the Thai BISPA us here. These are the organizations that help support the incubators, the accelerators, where the startups can test the ideas in a less risky environment. You have the service providers. They provide the resources that the startup needs in like more affordable, more accessible. For example, telcos, office space offer different packages to startups that just so they're cheaper or more accessible to them. Because we do need these resources, but we cannot afford, the general package. And then, of course, the funding organizations. You have the venture funds financing institutions, the banks, who give the capital for a startup to run. There are different forms, there are different models, there are different frameworks, but essentially, which was also covered earlier, these are the startup ecosystem essentials. You have the capital, talent, corporations. Corporations are the big shots who have the money to infuse into the startup ecosystem. And they're also the institutions who are in need of innovation, and their source of innovation usually would be the startups. The learning institutions, research institutions, regulations, which create the environment for the ecosystem to thrive, and of course the support groups. So this is just how they work in one graph. This is how they interact with each other. This is from Startup Commons, which is an open source information for startups. Next. And then an ecosystem there's something called the life cycle, which is the framework to gauge the maturity of an ecosystem. You have the activation, globalization, expansion, integration. Basically, this based on this framework, you see how global, because in this framework, the basis of success of startups is that you are globally connected. So eventually you do expansion globally, and then you do integration that's beyond just the startup ecosystem into different areas of, for example, the government. Your startups now reaching influence in laws, policies, like that. And these are the activities that would be the concern of in different stages. For example, activation. When you're just starting up the ecosystem, you're more concerned with building the community first. And then mostly the funding that would happen would be just seed funding, small amounts given to idea stage startups. And then eventually you move to a more global stage where the funding would be bigger. They would be based not just locally but also internationally. Yep. And based on this framework, of course, we know we gauge the startup ecosystem's success. Of course, we know Silicon Valley would still be #1 at this point. They're the most globalized ecosystem. There is no Asia here. Oh, Berlin is on 7th. There's only one ASEAN country here, Singapore, which is 12th. So this is based on talent, too small. Talent, performance, yeah, the metrics. A lot of them are actually from the US because the US has started early on with the innovation, the wave of technology that produced the first generations of startups. It's important for a startup ecosystem to have earlier generations of success because the knowledge that these successful entrepreneurs pass on to the next generation is very important. So moving from the global to the ASEAN ecosystem, of course, Singapore is #1 in terms of investment. Thailand made it to the list at 5th. Philippines did not make it on the list, but I think it's just under Thailand. Okay, based on this framework, we see a trend in 2017. This is for ASEAN. So in 2017, we actually increased funding, but the funding went not to the seed or the early stage startups. They went to the more established companies. I saw this in the Philippines. So 2017 was a very quiet year for funding for startups in the Philippines. I think when my theory is that when the investors funded in 2015, either they were very traumatized that they lost their money in the 2 years, or they wanted to see how their investment is still doing before they make a new investment. So it's still very quiet to fund the early stage startups. Now more money is still going to established companies. Okay, so from this comparison from global to ASEAN, we see some insights. This is something to think about because the framework that we saw earlier may not be applicable to our local environment. Maybe not yet. We're not ready for a globally connected ecosystem just yet because there's a lot of local issues that we still have to solve. For example, in the Philippines, I'm in the transport technology, which is still very young, underdeveloped. Maybe, perhaps it's also the same. There are similar industries here in Thailand, but mainly the startups in ASEAN are focused inward, solving local problems first. So maybe the metrics for success in startups at this point could change a little. Instead of valuation or larger exits or global connectedness, we could measure impact local first. Because that's more important to build, grow the local community and technology innovation system internally. And then eventually, if we do mature in that area, we can move globally to a more globally connected ecosystem. Next. Okay. So I looked up some players in the ecosystem. I put the foreign organizations coming in are also important because they bring best practice knowledge from abroad, which we can use locally. Universities also are there. So there, Startup Thailand. And in the Philippines, so in the Philippines, we have the Department of Trade and Industry leading it. and they had a partnership with one of the incubators to form Kubo, which is the national support for startups now. It's Kubo Innovation. And recently they formed the Department of Information and Communications Technology, which is the department I work with a lot to promote tech entrepreneurship. And then you have the Innovate accelerators, universities, and these here, Caliber, PhilDev, Surpass, these are companies of first-generation entrepreneurs who succeeded in Silicon Valley, and now they're back in the Philippines, giving back to the local entrepreneurs community, helping out, mentoring. PhilDev actually worked with the Department of Education, and now we have Tech Entrepreneurship 101 required in all engineering courses in the Philippines. All universities are required to take this subject. So this is a step towards infusing tech entrepreneurship in the education system. Maybe Germany could also do something like that if they can. Yeah. So the Philippine startup ecosystem, in terms of the phase we are in, we're just in the activation stage. Mostly are seed funded, like me, and still, gaining traction, getting the community together, building experience, still lacking a lot of resource, but we're getting there. Yeah, this is the ASEAN, ASEAN Slingshot, which happened last month during the APEC. This is similar to Startup Thailand, where we got together all the major startups in the country to pitch in front of the investors, and it was a big coverage during the Startup APEC Summit. Next. Okay, now zooming in further to my company, I Want Seats was founded, I Want Seats is an online booking platform for buses that I mentioned earlier. We were founded in 2015, which is the time that most of the startups in the Philippines were founded. So you could say I'm one of the pioneer founders in the Philippines. And I'm still lucky to be here, survived. And in 2015, we were mostly bootstrapped. Are you familiar with bootstrapping? Running your startup without external funding. So you run on your own money, your own revenue. And then after 2015, we gained traction, and then I was able to get seed funding in 2016 from an angel investor. And then just this year, I did an investment partnership, which was for me strategic because I was looking not just for money anymore, but also for operational support, which my partner has been able to provide. Okay, so I work, our startup is in transport technology, which has been a big challenge for me as a female founder because transportation and technology in the Philippines is primarily dominated by men. But, I like the challenge, so it's been fun. And in terms of our traction, we've been able to serve 50,000 online booking customers. And our enterprise solutions, we have both B2B and B2C. Our enterprise solutions have reached 500,000 customers. So our story, my story as an entrepreneur actually was it's not your typical startup story. I once started in a software company. We were already working with bus operators, transport logistics, and then we came up with a booking system because we saw a really big problem in transport. They were doing everything manually. People would line up at the terminals for 5 hours or more just to get a bus ticket. And this was ridiculous, and it wasted a lot of people's time. And it also caused a loss of money on the part of the operators. So we created a system to automate this and to make it a platform. And eventually, I saw the potential in it. I made it into its own company. And this happened in 2015. So in 2015, I didn't even know what a startup was. I just knew that I had an idea and I wanted to make it into something. I didn't know what a startup was. So I set it up, and then it gained traction, and then people started calling me, hey, do you want to pitch? I think you're a startup, you're a tech startup. I was like, really, what's a startup? I didn't even know. And then they're like, do you want to pitch? Do you want to talk? Do you want to give talks or like that? And I tried to say yes. And when I pitched, I didn't even know how to pitch. I didn't even know how to do a pitch deck. I didn't even know what a value proposition or a business model was at that time. So what I did, who knows Shark Tank? Shark Tank, there. I taught myself how to pitch by watching Shark Tank, there. And then I formed my pitch deck because of that. And fortunately, on my first pitch, I got my first investor. So lucky. But, you know, that was my entry into the startup community, because the person who funded me was apparently unknown angel investor. So when I got funded, it blew up in the startup news, and that was it for me. I entered the startup community there. And, you know, that's my experience. I did not go through an incubator or an accelerator, but that says a lot about the state of the Philippine startup ecosystem at that time, which was unprepared to help someone like me. I had to do it alone. I had to learn on my own then. And fortunately, it turned out to be okay. Now I'm with the startup community, and I get to contribute my learnings. But not everyone has that kind of luck or support. So it's very important to grow the startup community so that they don't have to go through what I did. It'll be easier for them to, more entrepreneurs will have it easier, save more time to actually build the business and then pitch or to study when there's already existing knowledge on it. Okay, so from all this, we listed the elements of an ecosystem, but what does it really take to build a startup ecosystem? Our list earlier did not really mention the cultural or the value requirement to put these elements together. So in my opinion, what it really takes to build a startup ecosystem is trust. This is very cliche, but very true in my experience. Because startups by nature exist in an environment of uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know, there are no regulations to support you, not a lot of organizations to support you. So everything, when you start, will be built on trust. The customers that we got trusted us that we will deliver. And I had to take care of that trust. My investor trusted me that I will not run off with his money. And I took care of that trust. At the same time, I trust my investor to be there as a mentor, for example. And the government trusts, we all trust the government to provide the ecosystem, the regulatory ecosystem for startups to thrive. Likewise, the government trusts the players that the investment will not be wasted or the regulations will not be abused. We trust the learning institutions to train proper workers or to produce good talent, which we will eventually use in our startups. It's really a community of trust, especially when you're starting, when there's not a lot of foundation. This is your foundation. So to build a startup ecosystem, we all know the objective elements, but it's actually, to build this, we need to build a culture of trust. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Samantha. And may I invite Sigrid and Samantha to be on stage once again for further discussion. So in the meantime, if anyone in the floor would like to throw a question, please feel free, even in Thai or English, that's fine. We will try to my best to translate it to our speakers. Is there anyone right now? Yes, right there. May I ยื่นไมค์ให้แขกหน่อยค่ะ ปุ้ยค่ะยื่นไมค์ให้แขก May I ask you to introduce yourself and then follow by the question.
Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Piranan. I'm from Keenan Institute of Asia. I've been working with the youth and working in the upcountry. So my question is about, first one is how do you get to be involved with your angel? How do you meet your angel? I think you have got a good idea. You see the pain of the people around you. But the hardest part is how you meet your angel. And the second question is back that how Friedrich Naumann involved with this project.
Oh, okay. First, the angel, how I met my first angel. I was asked to pitch at a conference, which was my first time speaking in front of 100 people. I was very nervous, but this was the time I arranged my pitch deck learning from Shark Tank. So I pitched. He was one of the investors present there. And then he expressed, after my pitch, he expressed his interest because this guy is in fintech. And he was interested in incorporating bus booking into his platform. Yes, a payment platform. And so we agreed. And we did a few meetings, and then eventually we came to an agreement, and then the investment was made. And Friedrich Naumann, I was fortunate enough to join a program by Friedrich Naumann in 2016. They arranged to have 7 founders in ASEAN countries from Malaysia, Philippines, Taiwan, and was that in Indonesia? There was no one from Thailand at that time, but there were 7 of us. No one from Hong Kong. Myanmar, yes, yes. So there were 7 of us, and we went to Germany and met with the different players in the startup ecosystem there. We learned from co-working spaces, other startups in Germany, universities. And at the same time, they learned from us. So it was a German ASEAN startup exchange.
If I may add to that, we're interested in this. We believe that the future economic development will be shaped to a significant degree by this, by IT, by having a vibrant startup culture. We're trying to educate people in Germany that this is a big thing and that the country needs to change. And at the same time, in the countries that we work in, like in Thailand or the Philippines, we also try to create more awareness, more public awareness for this sector. Because indeed, for developing countries, this is a great opportunity to leapfrog a stage of development and basically catch up with more established economies in a new technology. So this is, I would argue it's crucial for Germany, but it's even more crucial for countries like the Philippines or Thailand, because this can really give the economy a much bigger boost. And the other question about angel investor, I think one thing that one has to keep in mind, and I think Samantha made that clear, you can only meet an angel investor once you've done once you've put together your idea, your team, and once you show some serious results. An angel investor will not come in and give you money to start the process. You have to, as you mentioned, you have to bootstrap first.
Something, yeah.
No reward without homework.
Mm-hmm. And definitely,
and then, of course, I think that and the last issue is indeed we need platforms where angel investors can meet startups. Some will go and seek them out, but if organizations like BISPA and us do
provide
more
that
to
kind
provide
of
platforms
platform.
for startups and raise the awareness of the need for that. That can help getting them together.
Yes, and also from my point of view, I saw that when startups really have the value for that kind of strategic investors, that would like a good match between those guys to meet and then take off from there. So, okay. Anyone? Okay, please. The microphone, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Kamalat from Open University. We have the expertise research center that using ICT for empowering the marginalized. I do agree with the startup idea, and then I think that by the era of ICT, it is very fit to the new generation, and it proves that the new generation is very fit to the ICT, and then they are very quick to learn from that. I do agree that we better have we should have kind of platform or hub, right? And then the other thing that I would like to have for my marginal kid or the youth in Thailand is we need a hub of cases, because the youth, they enjoy to learn from the other by the fast track, kind of that. So besides from the platform, I think that if some agency, for example like SIPA or I don't know, the MDES, Ministry of Digital or Economy, will be the hub of the showcase, for example, of the startup in Thailand, and then we can learn from each other by the fast track. Because like now we work among the marginal school in Thailand, and then we try by earlier, and then if there is some hub to accumulate any showcase for that, so the new startup will be very growing very fast. So I think that there should be some more showcases, hub to learn from each other. Yes.
Okay, may I address this question, because it's quite in Thailand experience. In Thailand, as Mr. Chalampon mentioned earlier, together with the Ministry of Science and Technology, and also we have a collaboration across other ministries, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Digital Economy, and we we use our big event each year, as we call it, Startup Thailand, to gather the ecosystem, stakeholders in that ecosystem, to help even do the public awareness, to promote the entrepreneurship cultures in the country. And also we have, as Thai BISPA ourselves, we also have the networks of business incubators and science parks across the country to even be the brotherhood for the newcomer in the ecosystem. So that's from my point of view. And maybe some of these stakeholders, we have policy office from the Ministry of Science and Technology, the STI. They do lots of national policies to promote entrepreneurship. Maybe, would you like to add something? He would. Would you like to add something for promotion of entrepreneurship? Okay. Yeah, projects and those kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm China Wuchinapayu. I'm Director of New Venture and Entrepreneurship at National Science Technology Innovation Policy Office, and also we run Startup Thailand with the Ministry of Science Technology. So actually what we are doing right now in Thailand, besides promoting startups, is also we try to work with some 30 universities across the countries, working on entrepreneurship education. Actually, what we call is entrepreneurial university project. So we go even beyond the education. We try to look into the infrastructure. We try to look. Actually, I should stand right. Okay. We try to look into infrastructure from. We try to also create a networks of for university to become more entrepreneurial. As a sense also, basically what we work with them is we also working on entrepreneurship education from developing courses. A lot of entrepreneurship courses. We have a quite extensive trainer programs. We trained last year like more than 1,000 lecturers across the countries, for example. We work with a university to provide them with some of the funding to start to working on boot camps, on hackathons and those kind of things. We develop some of the mentor as well. So like last year we ran about 30,000 university students across the country. We also working with them to create physical space for them, like a co-working space, fab lab, and those kind of facilities. And most importantly, we try to work with each university to decide what are the next achievement for them, what are the strategy, what are organizations that they have to become for the long run, that after the government try to provide some of the seed fund and try to bring new players, to get them to know more, work more with the industry, work more with startup associations, work more with the startup associations in Thailand and abroad as well. So this is something that we try to do, try to build up the ecosystem in the university to provide the seed, because we also have the problem facing the same problems about the awareness, about the culture, about the university never been trained to think creatively and innovatively. And we also are facing some of the problem where we don't have enough deal flow for building a good quality startups. This is something that we try to achieve as well. Yeah.
So I'm sure that during dinner, you two might need to exchange your business card to further discussion. All right. So, Mr. Shulamun, would you like to add something, or?
Okay, I think he said.
he covered it all, right? Okay. So regarding this question in your ecosystem about the maybe some kind of hub of startups or ecosystem builders together in Philippines, are there any things like that to promote the entrepreneurship in the country?
Yes, so our Department of Trade and Industry partnered with a big incubator, Idea Space, to form Kubo, which is now the hub, the official startup hub, innovation hub of the Philippines. Also, our ICT department is just launched recently this program of Next Wave Technology Cities, because they want to reach out to different marginalized areas, not really marginalized, but what they see as next potential cities, not just Manila, not just the capital, but they're trying to reach out further. And yes, yep, and into different provinces and look for the talent, spark innovation, spark interest in entrepreneurship in these small communities. And they have something called Startup Weekend, which is also a hackathon that happens every weekend. So they do design thinking, discover problems and solutions, and then do a prototype during that weekend. And then some of them actually go beyond that weekend to become actually a startup after that. So these sort of activities spark interest first, and then programs eventually have we have programs that are follow through. So there's sparking interest, and then there's also, after that interest is sparked, we should have a platform for those interested people to actually do the startups eventually.
From German experience?
And in Germany, such hubs would be rather run by universities or by business associations like the Startup Association, because government bureaucracies are usually not very well equipped or very well trained to really understand the needs of businessmen. The mindset of bureaucrats and the skill set of bureaucrats is geared towards implementing rules, not fostering innovation and risk-taking. Bureaucrats are not supposed to take risks. So therefore, we tend to give that more to either universities, which are of course publicly funded, or specialized industry associations that also can access public funding for that. But we'd rather give public funding to private players or non-profit players to provide that sort of training and incubation. And some, especially incubation services, are done by private investors. I mentioned Susanne Klatten, one of the owners of BMW, who has basically invested money in creating a startup hub. Or one of the big incubators in Berlin is Rocket Internet, that try to provide a space for startups to come in and grow. So that is, I think, a model that is also worth looking at.
So
Relying a bit, making it easy for private investors to do that, and giving public money to private organizations like chambers who are better suited to this sort of dissemination.
Where the emerging economies like Philippines and Thailand, government sector has to play a lot of roles in promoting this kind of stuff. And the other side, where Germany, I think the business side is quite strong, and they can put a lot of their dedication and contribution to the society in terms of building up the ecosystem to help promote the entrepreneurship in the country. So, okay. Yes.
I'd like to ask you on the government incentive for investor, either the angel investor, do you have anything that would incentivize them to invest? Or do you have anything for VCs?
As far as I know, not yet. And that is one of the big gripes of our startup industry, that they say the tax code is actually not favorable to angel investors and to venture capital funds. For example, in America, big pension funds are an important source of capital for venture capital funds. In Germany, our pension fund is run by the government, and it's expressly forbidden from doing more risky investment. So part of our capital market is not geared towards this, and so that is why we would have to redesign some of our tax laws and indeed our investment laws to make that easier. And that is one of the reasons why we are not yet where we could be in terms of startup culture. Sorry, Samantha.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, same with us. We don't have that setup. For example, my company is set up as a corporation, and so it's set up similarly to a corporation, an actual corporation in the Philippines, where I need 5 directors, this certain amount of minimum investment, same tax rate, which is very hard for me as a startup because, when we were starting, there's no income or very little income, right? And you spend just as much time preparing papers, same with the corporation. So it's still something we're working on. Yes. This year, our president, Duterte, just announced that he wanted next year to support more SMEs and micro enterprises, including startups. So I'm hoping that there will be more initiatives to change these things.
Right. So, yes.
Good evening. I'm Panchada Siriwanabut from Mahidol University. Well, first of all, I would like to mention that I'm a political scientist, and now Mahidol University is kind of push all the professors to teach entrepreneurial education for our first year students, including medical students. Well, the guy from the ministry, he mentions that there's a training course for our professor to learn about the entrepreneurial educations. I believe that all my group of teaching, we don't really have an experience or learning any trainings about entrepreneurial educations. So my question is, if you have to teach the first year student in Thailand about the entrepreneurial education, what are the important points that you want to teach them? The basic idea, what kind of basic ideas that you want to teach them? I just need your recommendation and advice. I'm going to bring this back to my colleagues in Mahidol. And the second question is for Mr. Hersong. Yeah. Can you tell me what exactly the German Startup Association do? What exactly that they do? Thank you.
I'll answer the first one.
Yeah.
So,
Entrepreneurship education.
yes. I mentioned earlier that I participate in government efforts to reach out to universities outside the capital, and this is actually something related to what I do. What we do, we we gather engineering, business, marketing students first, and we ask them to think of a problem that's local or they experience every day, because you're more effective in finding solutions to a problem which you're very familiar with, or you're that's personal to you. So what they do is they search for problems in their local communities. For example, I found that waste management is very common in provinces in the Philippines. Waste management, transportation, energy. And so first, you have to teach them how to ask questions. Yes, ask the right questions, because asking the right questions makes you more effective in finding better answers. So you ask the question of problem, and then you ask the question of how to solve this problem. And then you ask the question of how best to solve this problem in such a way that it's sustainable, it benefits more people, and creates impact. So it's really asking the questions first. You teach them how to ask, to think, to observe, and be always on the ground, because you can't find opportunities when you're not on the ground. For example, me, I make sure I'm always with the people who commute, because I see their pain, and then from that I think of other solutions to add to my product. Yes.
What I would add is, and I'm an economist, so I have to say this, I think students need to learn the 101 of market economy. So they need to understand the basics of the price mechanism, the role the market mechanism plays as a process of discovery, of permanent disruption, of innovation, and driving change. Because that is really why the market economy beat out socialist economies, because a planned economy is far too static. Any innovation annoys the planners, whereas a market economy thrives on coming up with new ideas to solve problems. So that is something that students have to understand, that the entrepreneurship means you find new solutions to problems of scarcity, of high costs. They need to understand the concept of transaction costs, why we have companies, and what sort of transaction costs they would have to face. I think those are sort of the basics from the economic side, that they need to understand where entrepreneurs fit in society, what their role is, how they create value, how they create new ideas, how they create new solutions. All too often in our education system, entrepreneurs are sort of vilified as sort of evil, egoistic, greedy exploiters. And the true role of an entrepreneur, of someone who comes up with a new idea and a new solution, that is not properly understood. I think that is sort of the mental, or you could say the value proposition that they need to understand, what an entrepreneurial role is. Someone who comes up with something new for society and at the same time for his own financial benefit. And then I think some basic skills, financial literacy, how do you deal with money, how do you make business plans, how do you keep an eye on the financial bottom line, and some organizational skills. What do you need for a good team? Because a lot of startups, especially in the startups, when you talk about startups, about innovative, digitally minded companies, you need usually someone who understands the business side, and you need someone who understands the tech side. So if you don't have a technological nerd who can do your coding and who really knows his stuff about the technical side, you fail. And if the technician doesn't have a partner who really knows how to keep costs under control, how to hustle, how to find markets, how to find opportunities, how to network, it fails also. So that's, I think, something people also need to bear in mind, that there needs to be a compact, a basket of skills. Samantha mentioned this at the beginning, and those I think are the important elements. What does the German startup associations, what do the startup associations do? They lobby with government for the necessary political changes. So when you look at the startup at the website of the German Startup Association, there's quite a lot of things where they say, this is what we need from politics. This is the political change, this is the legal change we need.
They voice up.
And they voice out to the education system and say, you are not teaching the kids what they need to know. So they have even a grading system where they give, every year they give grades to the different systems, education system, basic education, university system, and at the moment they all get failing grades. So they voice out and say, you guys are not doing your job for the future. So that is a... And they do research, so they provide the public and the media with enough information to say, this is important. This is how many jobs are on the line. This is the potential. This is where we are failing in comparison to other countries. This is what needs to be done. So both research, political advocacy, and then in particular, of course, when government comes and says, what exactly do you need, then they will go into the more specifics of where do we need a change in the tax code, where exactly do we need a change in the infrastructure system, where do we need a change in the immigration laws. So they try to be specific enough in their lobbying, but not lobbying necessarily just for favors. You will find relatively little that they demand special subsidies or special tax incentives. They lobby more for specific changes in the framework conditions. And say, you don't understand startups. We need a different attitude from government. We need more room for flexibility. We need lower transaction costs. You cannot make us spend most of our days filling out forms for government bureaucrats. That is a waste of our time, and it's in a way it's also a waste of government resources. Make it a bit easier. Don't tax us to death in the first year or in the first 2 years. Put a minimum threshold for earnings before you start.
At least for them to survive.
To survive,
in the
yeah.
few years of beginning of the business.
So that was a very strong message that I saw. Government needs to understand the particular culture of startups and needs to adjust its rules.
Okay, I think this is probably the role of association in Germany, and I think it's the same in Thailand. We have Thai Tech Startup Association. They also do the same, do the white papers and voice up what they really need for the communities. So that's pretty much they do. So I think we are quite a little bit behind schedule, and during dinner, I think you all could exchange your ideas and also discuss with our speakers where they are going to join our dinner as well. So at the end, may I have all your big applause for all 2 speakers on the stage. And I would like to thank you, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, for hosting this event, and I would love to hear from you again at the next activity we are going to pursue. All right, so please proceed to the dinner place just behind us through the back door. And those who have the parking ticket, you can get a stamp at the registration desk. Please enjoy your dinner. Thank you.
Germany tomorrow.
So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Keep in touch. Keep in touch. All right.
Of course.